I'm John Sicotte, executive editor of the Brewer magazine. Welcome to another edition of the Brewer magazine podcast, coming from my backyard and I-75 right over that wall there. Let's take a look this way. Yeah, that is where a car went through my wall. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, let's get on to what we're talking about today, and it's actually a dig into the archives. We're going back to 2019, before that thing happened in 2020. Talking to Rob Todd of Allagash, who we had the privilege of meeting, going out to Portland, a great trip for Brewer Magazine, getting a chance to talk to John and Jen at The Alchemist, Sean at Hill Farmstead, and Rob at Allagash, and a chance to be able to talk to all these great industry people, share their stories. And it's interesting because this is from 2019, to listen to talk about how cans are just becoming a part of the craft beer industry. I think Rob said at one point he was thinking around 35% of beer was in cans at that time. Think of that now. But there's some great insights there talking about the 90s into the early 2000s and how slow it took Allagash to grow. Even 4,000 barrels, 12 years in, now over 115,000 barrels as one of the top breweries, craft breweries in the country. Anyway, I wanted you to check out a opportunity to listen in, see what the entire interview that led to the cover story that came out later in 2019. And you can check it out. Rob Todd from Allagash here on the Brewer Magazine podcast.
Yeah, basically signed the lease in fall of 94, started building the brewery. I basically did that alone from fall of 94 to summer of 95, and sold the first batch of Allagash White summer of 95. Then I basically ran it alone for the first year. Just did all the brewing, keg washing, anything that had to be done. And hired my first employee in 96, who I actually just saw yesterday. He's a very close friend. Ned White is his name. And he started New England Distilling, which is right around the corner here. And if you get a chance, you should stop in and see him. His spirits are phenomenal. He's like, everything he makes, I love.
Nice.
So I went in there yesterday to get a bottle. And he's like, what do you want? I'm like, it's all good. I don't know. Gin. So, yeah, he makes a real nice rum, gin, rye, bourbon.
So by yourself, what was the plan at the beginning? How did you write your business plan at the beginning to think where was your inspiration for opening the brewery, and where was your business mindset for opening the brewery?
So, few things were going on. I had, a year prior to that, I had my only year experience in the beer business, which was working at Otter Creek Brewing.
Okay.
So I only had 1 year in the beer business. So one thing that was very important to me was to keep things as simple as possible, because I just didn't have a whole lot of experience. So I figured if it was a small operation, draft only, no employees, just one style of beer, that would be a way to launch things and keep them simple. And I would kind of learn as I went. So that was one reason to me that it was important to keep it simple. I also had a pretty limited budget, so I did a lot of the work myself, but I liked working with my hands. I had, in high school and college and summers, I did a lot of jobs in the trades. I love like plumbing and welding, carpentry, electrical stuff. I like doing that work. And I'd done a little welding in high school, and I had a pretty limited budget, so my plan was to cobble together mostly a bunch of old dairy equipment, and spend a few months putting things together. So, in a lot of ways that kind of kept it simple too.
Yeah.
I didn't have a consultant, or I didn't have to shop around for brewing systems. I put it together from what I knew with my 1 year experience in the industry, and it was just very, very simple, very, very Spartan, very manual.
Yeah. And when it came to the point White became a hit, or when you said you had to
You mean after
start
12 years?
where talk about just that early struggles. And I mean, the mid 90s was tough on breweries that opened up. I mean, there's still some guys out there, but a lot went by the wayside at that time.
It was a grind from a few perspectives. So I opened my doors in the summer of 95, and that's right when that kind of period of headwinds started. I mean, if you look at the growth curve of the industry, it grew like crazy right up to that point, and then things really just flattened out. And growth was slow. There wasn't a whole lot of excitement swirling around the industry like there is now for like a 10-year period from 95 to 2005. And in addition to that, I chose a beer style, which was something people had like almost zero exposure to. I used to walk into bars and pour samples of that white you're drinking now, and the first thing people would do is look at it and they'd be like, what's wrong with it? Why does it look like that? Why is it cloudy? And they'd smell the beer and taste the beer and they'd be like, why does it taste like this? And just people hadn't had these beers. But that was kind of what I was after, because back then in the 90s, almost all the craft brewers, and there weren't many of them. I mean, there were maybe, I don't know how many, 300 or so when I started. So back then, almost all the breweries were doing beers in the Belgian tradition, German tradition, some in the Pacific Northwest pale ales that were starting to arrive on the scene. But most brewers were kind of in those traditions. I didn't really see the point of spending a year building the brewery and maybe my lifetime running it, only to make beers that people could already get their hands on. I wanted to do something completely different. And I looked at the Belgian brewing tradition as an opportunity to do that. I chose the white because I looked at it as a beer which would indeed be a very unique experience, but was really a sessionable beer that I felt like is a great beer to drink year round. It's a great beer to pair with food. I mean, a great beer to drink outside barbecuing, like you name it. I think it's an accessible beer for like almost any occasion.
Sure.
But it is a very, very unique beer. And the kind of ironic thing is, or I don't know if ironic is the right word. Maybe it was almost like a paradox. I mean, I obviously wanted to survive, but it was important to me to give people this really unique experience. But unfortunately for me at the time, the experience was so unique that the beer didn't sell. So it was hard to survive. So it was 10 years of just like grinding it out, but I believed in it. And our growth for the first 10 years was very slow. We grew from just me, one employee, to maybe 5 employees after 10 years, which these days seems like, painfully slow growth compared to what you see some brewers doing.
Was it just with white that you were making, or had you kind of gotten a little more diverse in those 10 years?
Just white for the first year, and then double came out in the second year. Grand Cru came out in the third year. This is like ish, timing. Sure. I think triple was maybe the fourth year. So we really, 4 or 5 years into it, we were only doing 4 or 5 beers. And like I said, for the first year, we really just had the white.
Sure. And was there, when it came to selling your beer and going out and doing this, how far away were you going at that time? Just, was it the Portland area? Were you shipping it everywhere you could?
My plan was to just sell it in Maine, starting with the Portland area and just sell it in Maine. I thought, maybe we'd sell beer in all of New England, but doubtful, and maybe that would be years down the line. But we had so much trouble selling beer back then, I just decided the solution to our volume problems would be just to open as many states as I could. So I immediately just started opening up any distributor that was willing to buy our beer, even if they weren't willing to pay for it, and some of them weren't. So, I learned that lesson the hard way.
Sure.
I mean, you sell beer to someone, you figure, of course they're going to pay you in 30 days. Well, some of them don't pay you in 30 days, and some of them didn't even pay me. Luckily, we had an amazing relationship, especially with our local distributor, Nappy Distributors, and for years and years, I would load beer on the truck the Nappy distributor truck, and then I'd call Elmer Alcott, the controller there, the CFO there, and say, Elmer, I just loaded 16 kegs of white on the truck. Can I get a check? And I'd drive down there, and there'd be a check waiting for me.
Nice.
So
that probably kept you afloat.
Oh, absolutely. Wow. Yeah, we had a lot of great distributor partners that really enabled us to survive, because we had some not so great distributor partners also in some of the more distant markets.
Yeah.
We ended up in 30 states, and we were, by 04, we were 04, 05, we were, again, I had probably 5 employees. We were maybe selling 4,000 barrels of beer a year, and we were in 30 states. We were spread far too thin.
Yeah. Were you, in those 10 years, to get up to the 4,000 barrels, how many times did you have to kind of redo the brew house and start finding new equipment and stuff like that? Was it still pretty much original stuff, or were you just adding
No,
tanks?
There was a lot of the original stuff. In fact, our original mash lauter tun we used for 18 years.
Wow.
And it was an old dairy tank.
Mm-hmm.
For the first year, it didn't even have a manway on it, and after a brew, you had to jump in and shovel the grain up over the sides of it, down into a wheelbarrow, and then jump out when the wheelbarrow's full, walk it to a pickup truck, dump it in, and repeat.
Yeah.
No, a lot of that equipment we used for years, a lot of the original equipment.
Did you have a business background at all going into this?
No.
What are some of the big things you've learned in those first few years, and has helped you, towards this part of your career?
One of the biggest lessons I learned is don't be a mile wide in an inch deep. And that's one, in hindsight, probably mistake we made, is that we just got spread too thin over the first 10 or so years. Mm-hmm. I should have looked at maybe other ways of delivering the volume we needed to survive, ways other than just opening up as many states as we could, because we ended up in, like I said, 30 states with no full-time reps at the company. We probably weren't a great partner to our wholesalers back then. We weren't doing planning meetings. I mean, I could only get to so many markets, so many times a year. I was on the road constantly, and it's impossible to cover 30 states effectively. Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest lessons I learned is, don't spread yourself thin like that. Go deep in markets where you can be relevant and you can be competitive. Yeah. And we kind of learned that lesson the hard way, and between 04 and maybe 07 or 08, we started pulling out of markets where we didn't feel like we were relevant, and really focused our energy on drilling down into the markets where we felt like we could be competitive and strong and do a great job. And that's what we've been doing for the last 15 years. And now we'll sell about 100,000 barrels this year, but we'll sell it in 17 states. Right. In half the number of states that you could buy our beer in a dozen years ago. Mm-hmm. And the beer is fresher everywhere. We have great relationships with our distributors essentially everywhere. The beer is rotated. We have a really robust system of planning well in advance of each year with our distributor partners, and we have great reps in every single market. So we feel like we're doing a A+ job everywhere now, whereas honestly 15 years ago we were probably doing a D+ or C- job everywhere.
Sure. Has the branding and the message resonated better in the 17 states versus the 30? You kind of talked about being able to share that message when it was just you out there. It's a little more personal, but now you're closer to home. People kind of know that message a little better.
It's just easier to tell our story. We have 25 amazing reps in the market, and that's 25 people that are out there telling our story in half the states that I was trying to do it on my own. And they're great at telling our story. And different things resonate with different people. I mean, for some people, maybe our philanthropy program, or maybe it's sustainability that resonates with some of our customers. We're doing a ton of work now with the Sebago Lake watershed, and which is where we get our water, and with preserving Casco Bay, which is a very important part of this community and tourism in the state of Maine. or maybe it's quality that resonates, which is a very important part of our story. We have 7 full-time people in our lab program, like very, very robust quality program, to the point where even some of the brewers in this community come to us if they have challenges. And with some of this equipment that I never would have dreamed of having a dozen years ago, we're able to quickly maybe give them some answers and help them with any quality challenges.
Sure. And you touched on that, the fact that there's so many breweries that probably come to you guys. People look to you, as a stalwart in this area, in the whole craft beer scene. How do you work with breweries that are either starting or on that, 5-year plan and moving past that? I mean, how has your communication been with them?
We try to support them as much as we practically can. If they, have questions about quality, safety, HR, we engage with tons of brewers in this community on an ongoing basis. And I mean, those resources really weren't there when I started.
Yeah.
There weren't that many breweries around. Everyone got along pretty well, but there just weren't many of us. And now there are a lot of breweries, and we happen to be one of the larger ones in the area. And again, we're very proud of our quality program. Just to name one facet of this business where we've lent a hand to some of the other breweries. But I almost look at it as our responsibility to do that, because the brewing community as a whole is better if all the players are raising the bar with their quality. I mean, who knows, someone's first experience with a craft beer, it may not be with us or with one of the bigger craft brewers. It might be with a startup brewer in their local community, and we're all better off if that quality is there, and we're happy to support them any way that's possible or practical for us.
And you kind of touched about having to be out on the road so much. So obviously that meant you stepped away from the brew house pretty early. That had to, because this is your baby. How did you work through that transition and going from kind of a brewer to a salesman and a business person?
Back then, I could actually do a little of both in the early days, because I could brew a batch of beer Monday, wash kegs Tuesday, fill kegs Wednesday, and then spend like Thursday, Friday in the market, Saturday selling beer, and then come in and do a bunch of mechanical work on the brewery Sunday. I mean, it's 7 days a week back then. Sure. So I was able to still do a little of everything, but really, I've handed obviously a lot off over the last few years, and it's not hard to hand stuff off when you have very, very competent people, which we do. I'm more confident in everyone else's ability to do the things that I used to do than I am in my ability to do it. Jason is a, far, far more capable brewer than I ever was or ever would be. So, I've got just so much confidence in the crew here.
Yeah.
It's once you hand things off and realize they get done a lot better by people who are more competent than you are, then it gets really easy to hand those things off. So that was never something that I struggled with.
How are you guys adapting to this new market of 8,000 brewery shelf space is limited, and digging into your territories?
Yeah, it's definitely competitive, and as I step back and look at the industry as a whole, in a lot of ways, it's been pretty amazing what's happened in this industry, because here's an industry which, like pretty much every other industry in our lives, between World War II-ish and the 80s, 90s, got commoditized, and it got pulled out of communities, whether it was textiles or making shoes or light and heavy manufacturing. All that stuff got stripped out of communities, and in some cases pulled overseas, and just commoditized. And same thing happened with beer, but beer's been one of these few things that has been returned to communities. So it's just amazing what independent brewers have done in this country to re-deliver value on so many fronts to these communities. But of course, it's gotten more competitive, but I think you just need to do things that continue making your brand and your brewery relevant. I mean, one of the many examples of things we do, we have this really cool program with Innovation, where anyone at our company, any of our 150 employees, they have an idea for a beer, they can talk to Jason, our brewmaster, and brew it on a little 10-gallon system. And some of those beers have become full-scale production beers. A number of them have.
Nice.
And so rather than just our innovation department being me, the owner, or Jason, the brewmaster, we have 150 people here at the brewery innovating. So, that's one way that we ultimately, I feel like, are, continuing to deliver value to beer drinkers and continuing to stay competitive. And it's a way for us to have a lot more, fun doing it.
Sure.
So just by doing things like that on a lot of fronts, knock on wood, it hopefully continues to keep us on the growth trend, which we continue to be on. We grew just a little bit last year. We're actually growing a little more this year. We're super excited about our can release. We just rolled the White and the River Trip out very early this year. They're doing great. I love being able to drink the White out of the can. For 24 years, I could only drink it draft in bottles, and now I get to drink it out of a can, which is what I'm doing right now. I think that'll continue to drive growth. Our brand is very underdeveloped in the off-premise and in supermarkets and chain stores, independent liquor stores. We're very underdeveloped. We're very thoroughly developed on the tap and in the restaurant format. But off-premise, we're pretty underdeveloped, and we look at that as huge opportunities, and we feel like cans are going to deliver some of those opportunities for us.
Nice. And I did notice that you guys are expanding in the canning side because you've already, it was just not enough for what you got, and you kind of saw too much and had to add it, or why is the second canning line being added?
So the little machine that you saw out there
was more experimental.
We've got it at the point where the quality's great coming off that machine, but there is absolutely no way we'd be able to service all 17 of our states. Absolutely no way. So we're distributing to the Northeast now from Maine to New York. We're absolutely at full capacity on that little canning line, doing White 4-packs, River Trip 4-packs, and some occasional specialty releases. But we've got a ton of demand from markets down south, from Chicago, from California for the cans. So that's the main reason we're putting this faster line in, is to be able to service those markets, and then hopefully come up with some different package sizes beyond just 16-ounce 4-packs. And I don't know exactly what those will be at this point. We're looking at a number of options, but we're hopefully going to be able to roll out some new package sizes and some more brand variety. Yeah,
and there has to be an intentional amount of research done before that to make sure that you're successful and you're doing the right thing off the bat, so there must be a lot of thought process going into it beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. We sure don't want to roll something out that isn't relevant or people don't want. So we spend a ton of time. Again, I mentioned our 25 sales reps. They're constantly in the market engaging with customers drinking beer, retailers, our distributors. I spend a ton of time engaging with retailers, distributors, customers, and so we're trying to get as much feedback as we can and be as thoughtful as possible and make sure whatever we roll out, people want.
Were you surprised cans have taken off in craft beer as much as they have?
I sure would never have guessed that there would be as much beer sold in the can format as there is now. Like, if you'd asked me 5 years ago what percentage of beer would be sold in cans, I probably wouldn't have said whatever the number is now, which is probably in the, it changes daily. It's probably 35, 40% now.
And does that change, quality-wise, when you're talking, is there any changes going from bottles to cans?
Not for us. I mean, we spent a year. In fact, that's really what we researched more than what people wanted was on the quality side. We spent, a ton of time and energy. We've had that machine actually there, canning beer. We had it there months before we actually started rolling beer out from that machine. We got, for instance, this white beer to the point where on blind tasting panel, and we have about 50 of our full-time employees pretty heavily trained on sensory. We're at the point now where statistically in a blind tasting, those 50 employees could not tell the difference between cans and bottles. So there's no quality difference from our perspective. We're still can conditioning, and just like we condition in the bottles on the bottle side, and it's identical.
Nice.
It's a little bit of a different experience drinking it directly out of a can versus drinking it directly out of a bottle. But if you pour two in a glass and ask someone to tell the difference, not gonna be able to do it.
Nice. Well, talking about white, and you kind of said, 12 years after the fact, it finally became a hit. Where was that point where you guys saw the massive growth?
It's right around 06 and 07 is when it started to pop. I mean, it was
it just
10
the
years,
market
maybe closer to 12
and
years.
The craft beer in general, or was it something that you think
I get
happened
asked
for you
that
guys?
one all the time, and I don't have an answer, to be honest. I
Sure.
think really the answer is we just stuck with the white, had confidence with the white, kept pushing it for 10 years, believed in it. I personally love it. I was out there doing beer dinners and talking about the style and introducing it to people. And I think just all that hard work and perseverance, and also 10 or 12 years of just focusing on quality, just finally got traction. I mean, you just to use a cliche, you push a flywheel enough for long enough, it finally starts to go.
Yeah.
So I think it was a lot of that, and then I think it was that coupled with a bunch of external factors that just happened to happen at the same time. Like the craft beer industry as a whole started to pop. I would say right around 06, 07, which is when we started to pop.
Yeah.
So I think it was just the grinding away at it and sticking with it and focus on quality and education and just working on it for years and years and years, and that started to get traction around the same time the industry as a whole got traction. I think that's why it started to pop.
Nice.
I don't think it's one thing I can kind of
Pinpoint.
pinpoint.
Yeah.
Don't forget, you can always check on brewermag.com. You can also see us on YouTube and listen to us on Spotify. And don't forget daily updates on Facebook, Instagram, and X. I'm Executive Editor John Sicotte for brewermagazine.com.